Hello, I'm Rob Curtis, Marketing Director at Delta PV, and today I'm speaking to Andrew Mitchell, CEO of YEZA.ai and Industry Technology Savant, about the YEZA.ai E2B conversion software, how it came to be, how it works, and how it's being implemented. Now, this software has gotten a lot of traction and coverage recently, and as a very early adopter, Delta PV has seen firsthand how it's reshaping our pharmacovigilance case processing workflow. Our drive to be at the forefront of using it stems from the recognition of how it fits in with our position on technology, which is simple. Any system we introduce must bring real world, demonstrable, and repeatable benefits and value to ourselves and our clients in any combination of speed, quality, cost, accuracy, etc. In this interview, we're going to explore the story behind the C2B product, its implications for the industry, and where it and maybe AI in PV are headed next. So, first thing, Andrew, welcome to talking to us.
Hi, Rob. Nice to talk to you. Always a pleasure. And yeah, thank you.
So let's kick off, Andrew, with can you tell us a bit about your background and how you came to work in this intersection of AI and pharmacovigilance?
Sure, Rob. So I'm originally born in South Africa. I started my career as a software developer, and then I moved to the UK and ended up at Covance, and was essentially given the manuals and the number of the call center to call the vendor and figure out how to implement safety systems and how to implement E2B back in the very early days of where it was getting started. And that's how I got into the space and how I got into pharmacovigilance. Since then, more than 20 years have passed, and I've built two safety systems from scratch, been responsible for bringing them to market. Viva, IQVIA, building it up to Salesforce. Viva obviously has their Vault system and very established in the marketplace outside of safety. And then I felt like a lot of, especially in our space for drug safety, we've been talking about automation and artificial intelligence for years and years and years. But I didn't feel like, I felt like the definition of what AI had fundamentally changed with ChatGPT. And our understanding as consumers is very different now to what it might have been 5-10 years ago in terms of artificial intelligence. And we as a marketplace, or certainly as vendors in the marketplace, weren't really at the forefront of what is happening in other industries. And not only were we calling things artificial intelligence and AI, or doing what's called AI washing, when we didn't really have AI, not by current definitions of what that is, but also we didn't necessarily understand the technology or understand what the implications are of building on this technology for our software development practices. And that was one of the things where it was like, okay, let's try and do this ourselves. Let's find the right people. Let's build a product that is focused on how do we radically transform drug safety to be more about patient safety, and to be less, and how can we help safety to be less of a cost and compliance function, and in particular, how do we democratize access to automation? Like in the same way as everybody can now whip out their phones and access ChatGPT and have access to AI, I shouldn't need to spend millions of dollars on my drug safety department to be able to leverage AI and how better I process adverse events.
Okay. So what inspired the idea specifically of automating E2B conversion?
What inspired the idea? The main thing that inspired the idea was the idea that you shouldn't get locked into a platform. And we need automation tools that are system agnostic and that will fit into the way that you work in terms of your systems, but are also there to augment the human in the loop, so to speak. So augment the way that your team works. And we all work in different ways. We all work on different systems. And especially having worked at multiple CROs, it's very difficult to dictate to somebody how they are supposed to work, or like what narrative template they should use, or what form you want them to fill out. So E2B is an industry standard format that can then go downstream into whatever system somebody already has. We're used to getting them every day. And it was an industry standard format for us to leverage in terms of how do I get data, however it might come, and get it into structured format that within minutes of receipt my organization essentially knows what safety information we're dealing with.
So you really honed on to that specific kind of workflow pain point and come up with what you believe is the solution, essentially.
Yes. We fundamentally believe that intake shouldn't be a toll booth on a highway. It should be about how fast I can get my safety information into my database. Yeah. And yes, there are many other use cases for AI kind of downstream and alongside that. But if we can't get our data electronically into our system in a radically different way to how we do it today, with so much manual intervention or relying on people to fill out the right form correctly, the rest of it isn't going to matter, because garbage in, garbage out, and context is king when it comes is just as important when it comes to AI. So we have to solve that problem first. And we've tried solving the problem for years in trying to force somebody to go to a web page to fill out a form and collect but unfortunately, safety is not like that. Like our data, as you know, from the work that you guys do in Delta PV, especially all the local PV processing, like our data isn't clean. It doesn't always fit in neat and tidy boxes. Often it's reported without necessarily an intent that it was going to end up with the drug safety team.
Okay. I mean, I'll come back to that later, actually. But I mean, how did you start this? Did you develop an early prototype or, an MVP? What was your process in moving forwards with this?
Yes, we developed a minimum viable product of I want to be able to process a form and peg data off that form without knowing or caring what that form looks like in advance, or whether that form had been filled in correctly. So like the first time somebody gave us a form that we'd never seen before, we were able to process it. But then you start to get into the nuances, like what happens when somebody has track changes on, and now there are extra checkboxes. So being able to handle things like that. That's where we started. We built the MVP, we got good feedback, and then we started expanding very quickly beyond that into not just doing forms, but also doing unstructured data, being able to do handwriting, being able to do multiple files instead of being stuck with one, or translation.
Right. I mean, I felt let's move on to a whole section in a bit more detail on that. But how does your product handle E2B conversion? What are the steps involved, and what are the technologies involved?
So
we're not giving anything away, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, this is an important principle. We aren't just a wraparound ChatGPT or like one large language model. The speed of change in which these technologies are moving at and the techniques that you use these technologies is unprecedented. Okay. So you can't build software the way that you used to for this industry, where I start, I decide I want to build a feature, I write requirements, engineering builds it. A year later, maybe it hits production. Things are moving too fast. And we built with this concept of artificial intelligence is more like infrastructure that we use today. And so it's using multiple large language models and small language models and the various different techniques. And often for some of the tools, we use no AI at all. But the goal is essentially you take the data that comes in, however it is, you break it up into pieces, throw those pieces in the air like a jigsaw puzzle, and then very, very quickly put the puzzles together. That is the final E2B file that's going to go out the door, with a lot of intervention steps in between to make sure that you're collecting the data correctly. Because if somebody types in the word privacy in the patient initial field, well, that's more than 3 characters. It's going to cause a problem when the case goes into Argus. So, I mean, that's essentially how we do it.
Okay. And I know that you've described the system as agentic, which some people understand this, some people not. But what's your description of agentic, and why the system is agentic?
There are lots of different kind of AI agents. AI agents are the buzzword of the year, 2025, you could say. There is AI agents, there is multi-agent workflows, there are swarm agents where they work together like a swarm as you would see in nature. There is a term that came out this month called ambient agents, And we feel like we play in that space where we're not an agent, like there's a chatbot, nobody's prompting. We're an agent that sits behind the scenes and we get triggered when an event occurs. And in this case, the event occurs when a file or files get transferred to us, and the ask is for us to process it. And we have to figure out very quickly what's the best way to process those files or file, and then extract the data, enrich the data, send it back to you in the format that's expected. And being able to do that at scale, being able to do that in parallel, if there are multiple files that are being sent at once. Ambient agents are a good description for what it is that we're doing. And what we mean by agents is there's a specific task that needs to be done. And part of the execution of that task involves planning how you do it. So, for example, if you were to send us multiple files for an adverse event because it came from clinical, and there was an SAE form that got completed, but there's also an EDC system that goes alongside with that, where there's demographic details and there's lab information and there's a medication log. Those can be sent over as separate files, and we will dynamically figure out in what order to process them and which file should be the backbone of the case, and where we fill in the details and how we deal with, where there are conflicts of information.
And so, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of variability in the data that you were receiving. Scanned PDFs, handwritten data,
emails, audio files,
whatever, coming through. So how are you managing that kind of variability and how you with that accuracy and the validation of the process?
So the variability is one of the things that Gen AI, or AI as we know it today, is really good at, compared to, let's call it, machine learning and natural language processing. And certainly my experience of building safety systems when we were using natural language tools in the past, like we would sometimes see different results if it was year versus years and things like that, which, in the real world doesn't work. So that really is a strength of large language models and small language models and vector databases and what we can do today that we couldn't have done a few years ago. And certainly the technology has moved on a lot from the IBM Watsons, when they try to solve safety intake, or Deloitte or Genpact. So we're in a very different space from a technology perspective that helps solve that. And then there's also a lot of work that has to be done, whether it's prompt engineering, whether it's verifying the data, whether it's using small language models to complement large language models to make sure that you're getting the accuracy that you need and you're not worrying about hallucination. And what's needed from the quality side of things.
How do you train the model to handle medical terminology and complex adverse event narratives?
That's part of what we do. Yeah. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, certainly we rely on things like it helps to use standard definitions. So like one of the things that we're doing as part of processing intake information is we're coding everything against Metro.
Right. It's that kind of, that's really
it's
what
that kind of thing.
What is it kind of working against? Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, the system is essentially working in a kind of standby mode. It's triggered when people are sending files to you, and then different processes kick off. Okay, fine.
Yeah, people or machines, yes.
Yeah. So on the next bit, when we get to compliance of this, regulatory compliance, as anybody working in PV knows, it's a very tightly regulated space. So how does the product align with ICH-E2B standards, GXP, GDPR, any of those kind of things, the regulatory check stuff that is a big part of the industry?
Well, safety is critical. because of the nature of the data that we process. So we're dealing with PI information, we're dealing with unblinded adverse events, just the nature of what an adverse event is, and the personal sensitivity of some of the stories behind the data. These regulations are important, and we made some very conscious decisions about how we went and designed and process and what our processes are for how the tool works. And one of those is that there's no data retention. So it is really like a pipe. It's a pass-through service. So when you send me safety information to process and I send it back to you, once I'm done processing that information, none of the safety information itself is being left behind. And that's really important. Okay. The other thing in terms of validation and GXP, and so firstly, from a GDPR perspective, yes, we're processing PI information. Our servers are in Frankfurt. We're making sure they don't leave EU. There's lots of security and cybersecurity, but also process security. And you're not leaving any data behind, which makes life a lot easier from a GDPR perspective. Mm-hmm. But the other side is, how do we validate it? What's needed to ensure control and demonstrate governance. What we're also not doing that's very different to historically what we've tried to do with artificial intelligence in PV is we're not training models as we go on your data. So, or if we are, it's a case of, do you want to turn that tap on? It's not a case of you are doing it by default. Mm-hmm. So if you're sending us safety information, that safety information, when we're saying nothing is left behind, we really do mean none of that safety information is left behind. Mm-hmm. And that has a significant impact on what is required to demonstrate GXP compliance in terms of computer systems validation. And then the other side of it is, well, how do we fit into your process? That are we just a tool and we sit alongside the way that you work today? Are you relying on us? Is somebody still behind the steering wheel? Those also are a big part of the different level of governance and control and validation that is required.
Right. And how does that kind of fit in with traceability and audit readiness? Because it's AI driven.
The fundamentals are the fundamentals. Nothing changes. Right. You've got to, but the nature of some of these large language models is very different to the statistics-based large language machine learning models that we've used, like a chess computer. And the CEO of Anthropic came out a month ago and basically said, they don't understand exactly why these models are making the specific decisions that they're making when you look down to the minutiae of the detail. And part of that is just the number of parameters that are involved. We're up to trillions of parameters that are involved in some of these large language models. And they describe it much more like growing something or like bacteria or growing a plant. And you hear of techniques like pruning than... Exactly. Pruning is used as part of how you can make a small language model, where it isn't just it's not black and white. Does it? Yeah.
I mean, I understand a little bit from looking under the hood. I read some Stephen Wolfram things, and we're talking about such huge numbers of parameters and different stages and layers of processing that's going on that it's impossible to really say it does this, anyone, and that's the state of where things are at. Yeah.
There are techniques and there's lots of things you can do to improve the reliability and the consistency, so things like RAGs, but if you scale it all back, in many ways it's like the predictive text on your phone.
Yeah. Well, just out of interest, has the system gone through any kind of validation framework like a GAM5?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so the system is working, stuff's going on. We've got humans still involved, and so there's labor and team aspects. So just to clarify, what role do human PV professionals play alongside the software? How are they playing, and what's your envisaged role? Are they the same?
So the human in the loop is the most important part of the process. And to be fair, I think it's the most important part of the process when it comes to protecting patient safety. Because yes, we need to be compliant. Yes, we want to get reports out in time. But what safety is really about is when an adverse event crosses my desk, is there something that catches my attention that, is a little bit odd? And for many companies, I mean, some companies might have the data to be able to do that automatically, but most companies don't. And so I think the human and at the end of the day, ultimately, you can't outsource responsibility. So whether it's a service provider or whether it's technology like artificial intelligence that's doing work on your behalf, you're still responsible as a marketing authorization holder. So having the human in the loop is vital for governance, but it's also vital for the way we intend to work as drug safety teams. And what we're doing is we're making it possible for, without any humans having to manually enter data into a database, to know whether that case should be at the front or the back of the queue. And being able to determine and not just treat them all the same. And I think that there are a lot of parallels. Well, not I think, I believe strongly that there are a lot of parallels with what our colleagues in clinical have been doing over the last 10 years around risk-based monitoring, and how we've gone from doing 100% source document verification. So every single data point that was captured in clinical trials used to be verified at the source, at the site, with CRAs visiting the sites and checking that data line by line by line, to now try to better understand what is the data that matters, and that the role of the CRO in many respects is shifted to be more about, how do we help the sites to be successful? And I think that's the same thing's going to happen with drug safety, where the role of case processors is going to be less and less about manual data entry and QCing the data entry, and more about oversight and governance, and do we understand our patient populations? And, is there now an opportunity for patient intervention? Because it didn't take me 3 days to understand what that adverse event was all about, from when my organization became aware of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is intertwined questions, but what would you see the key risk in automating case processing? And the mitigation argument. So, let's say you've got this is risky because it's going into, an AI system, and what have we got in terms of control? What would you see the risk with this? And in that pipeline of events and processes, where error is most likely to occur, and what you might be able to do with it?
What governance and control do you have over it? It's not just blindly implementing it. I also think, and this is one of the reasons, and again, come back to your earlier question about why did we start doing this in the first place? Not every safety department is the same. Not every drug is the same. Not every patient population is the same. So understanding how automation fits into the way your safety team is supposed to operate, and how you need it to operate to support the business, and what is going on in the broader context of the business. Like, am I launching my drug in Europe for the first time? Or is there now a new patient population group that I was less exposed to before? So to me, the governance is critical, but there isn't just a one formula that fits everybody. It's who, if you report to the FDA or if you report to the PMDA, or you're in oncology versus you're in a skin condition, your cases and your data and and your stakeholders are all very different. Mm-hmm. And they're going to require different levels of kind of governance and control because of the risks that are involved, or the nature of the underlying data, or the nature of the patients. Or so it's about supporting that and understanding what your organization's needs are, and the maturity of the safety profile of your drug is also really important.
Right. Have you faced much internal resistance? Obviously, firms are investigating the product and what the pros and cons, but within those companies, where is internal resistance, any return in internal resistance and friction coming from? What kind of areas?
So I don't know if I call it resistance or friction, but certainly everybody wants to invest in AI. Everybody's being told you need to be more efficient. Why can't you use AI? If you don't invest in AI, people are going to start pulling out their phones and do stuff themselves. So we have an obligation to provide AI tools for our employees. And I think like long-term, our ability to hire is going to be impacted by, access to this kind of technology, or at least retain top staff. But where we have, where we do, where things can take a little bit longer is that there's a lot of education that's needed. Especially given about how different some of the things that we're doing are, like there's no data retention. Well, the European Act around AI is largely all around what happens when I'm training models. But if I'm not training models with your data, then how much of it is still applicable? And where is it applicable? So a lot of what we are, I wouldn't say running into, but where a lot of the conversations that we're having are more about, yes, we understand your organization wants to use AI. Yes, we understand all the valid concerns around where is my data, what is happening with my data, what is the residency of my data. I don't want my data being used to train somebody else's models.
Yeah.
But then also the educational piece as to this is what we're actually doing. So it's like, do we have model drift? Is there opportunities for people to do prompt injection? Well, no. This is why. But those are all normal questions that you are right to be asking for, because everybody's been out there saying they have AI, they have AI, they have AI. Half of the time they didn't have AI, and it's important that if you're implementing AI, you do understand those kinds of things that are happening under the hood. I also think like change is hard in any organization, and I think people are worried about losing their jobs and what this new world is going to look like.
Come to that, in fact, but it's and just maybe on a separate bit, but just what I really kind of meant about resistance and friction is possibly to do with ownership within organizations where is this sitting with IT, is this sitting in pharmacovigilance areas? How does that kind of play out, really?
I think that depends on each organization, but certainly I'm seeing IT have more involvement than what they've typically had with SaaS solutions, largely because of this fear of AI and all the regulations, and there's more kind of corporate governance around which AI tools can I use. Like we're seeing legal contracts where, even I'm sure you guys as service providers, you need to disclose, are you using AI as part of your process? Mm-hmm. So that's natural. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
I'm kind of expecting, because, adoption's happening, things are going on, potentially there might be a little bit of jockeying for ownership of things because it's at the forefront of stuff. And I imagine that's just kind of natural, and it's down to each organization, right?
Everybody wants to be an AI expert.
Sure
probably
do.
knows. Sure your LinkedIn feed.
Yeah. So, I mean, we touched on here about...
But sorry to jump in. But that point's kind of also important and in some ways should be encouraged when you are implementing these tools. It's so different to what we've used before. It's important, and it's AI these days is you learn a lot about where it works best by using it. So it's important to identify who are the people on your teams that are the champions or are there that are essentially naturally drawn to learning about that stuff, are going to play with it a bit more, be creative with it, and can then pass on that knowledge to the people around them. Like that's really, really important. And we're seeing this across all industries where there are companies that are trying to be quote unquote AI first, or they're changing their expectations, where every person in the entire company, doesn't matter what your seniority is, you are expected to learn how to use AI effectively, and AI as part of how you do your job.
Well, I mean, I was actually going to ask you about, what kind of feedback you have from PV teams, that may have natural worries about automation and how that's transforming their job roles and required skills, because all this is interlinked.
Yeah. If you talk to somebody that's entered 100 labs into Argus or any other safety database, and you show them what you can do with AI, the conversation is very easy.
Yeah. Like, hello. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Nobody entered the space with
data processing, with data input in mind. Really, I was going to ask you about the future of AI in PV. Obviously, AI evolving at such speed, but how do you see AI evolving in pharmacovigilance? I was going to say over the next 5 to 10 years. That timescale could obviously be a lot shorter and variable because of the rate of change. But what's your view on AI in PV specifically?
I mean, naturally, my view of AI and PV is pretty optimistic, given the big bet that we're making on it. But really, I see adoption of AI and PV not just happening with pharma and service providers, but also very much happening at regulatory agencies. So, because they have the same challenge to solve as us, and often much smaller budgets than us, and less control in many cases over how the data is received, especially when they're getting it reported directly to them. And you're looking at regulatory agencies kind of beyond the more developed nations. And post-COVID, the scrutiny about adverse events is not going away. And there's more and more interest, and at the same time there's this AI thing that's happening that's transforming other industries and is, I believe, very much going to be transforming ours.
I was going to say, what do you think regulators need for confidence in future, or do you think they're going to have to take a punt? There's a certain, what will be the kind of big break through? And there's obviously bits and things that chip away with this. There's consultations, there's changes in things, etc. But if these systems are interlinked and things are being done directly, and etc., what do you think is the big tipping point for regulation?
I think the tipping point is already here. We can do it faster and cheaper and more effectively with higher quality than what can be done manually. And it isn't difficult to prove it, because when these tools are built right, they don't cost a lot to run. So, and we've seen this in healthcare. We've seen this with cancer detection, where you were able to demonstrate with high enough volumes of data that what the accuracies are and the benefits that they bring. And so, like the Swedish Health Authority just brought out a tool, announced a tool in the last few weeks using AI, and they were using DeepSeek as one of the AI models. And that's the AI model that came from China, which everyone's really scared about. But you don't have to run it from China. You can run it in your own environment and control control where the data goes or doesn't go. Yes, there might be some biases, but maybe those biases aren't relevant to PV, so it's fine. I don't know. I didn't build their tool, but I think it's here. I don't think we're still waiting for it. It's here. It's about how you implement it, and focusing on outcomes that deliver value rather than, we need to spend millions of dollars trying to build stuff from scratch.
And so essentially, you quite firmly see the end-to-end auto generation of safety reports is here, and this is what you're solving, more or less, yeah?
I think there's still a human in the loop, absolutely, but yes. Okay. And I don't think that, but I think it's been here for a while. We just haven't necessarily known about it, or the end-to-end automation was reliant on the happy path, if that makes sense. So if somebody filled in the right form and there weren't any mistakes and it was these particular products, then it was already, for some companies, completely automated or heavily automated. What AI has done is it's democratized access to automation that a lot of companies didn't really have access to before.
And beyond, obviously, your current product, E2B, the conversion, what other areas do you think are ripe for AI innovation?
In drug safety?
Yeah.
All over the place. Our goal,
or any
really,
particular areas that you've got in mind, as we say,
I mean, there are folks that are in the literature space, the AI space, that have been doing this for years and been very successful. We're not planning to go in that direction, but clearly there's a lot of value. If you have the data, there's a lot around signal detection and building aggregate reports and PSMF management. We're thinking about a lot of use cases and what comes next. And we're certainly appreciate feedback and listening from companies like yourself as to where you'd like to see us focus our efforts.
Well, in actual fact, I was going to mention that because Delta PV has got a well-earned reputation for creating solutions to complex requirements, which is born out from the experience gained from the diversity of products and countries and systems that we use. And this software is one of them, one of the parts of this. So we're obviously naturally invested in the long-term roadmap for the software. And I was going to ask what might your next product be? But even if we're just focusing in on the E2B component, how might companies like ours and YEZA.ai continue to collaborate on its evolution and the evolution of AI introduction?
The way that we're doing it already. It's great being able to, our development team is in Istanbul, where you guys have your offices as well. And we really appreciated all the help that we got working with you and being able to come and sit on somebody's shoulder while they're processing cases. And the deep domain expertise that you have from doing this for so many years, but also, your team's quite young. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean it in a, like, there's energy and we want to do things differently. And, just because we've done this for 20 or 30 years doesn't necessarily mean we still need to do it this way. Like, what is the true intent of what we're trying to do? And when it comes to building technology, I think that's what's really important as well. It is, you don't just build stuff because it's cool to build or because, hey, I've got, some fancy new way of solving a problem. It's like, what are the outcomes that you're focused on? And doesn't make sense. Not just, you don't build it because you want to show that you can build it.
Right. Well, we've got a lot of stuff there, Andrew. It's been a pleasure talking to you about YEZA.ai and the software that you're starting with at the moment, AI in PV. And hopefully we've kind of touched on some of the questions and challenges into the transition to AI becoming commonplace in pharmacovigilance. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time. Always great to speak to you.
Always great to speak to you as well. Thank you so much. Have a good time.
Well, cheers, Andrew. Bye.
Cheers, Rob.